Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ali Bajwa. I'm a senior lecturer in weed science and agronomy based here at AgriBio. And welcome to Herbicides module as part of the Part 2 ILP subject, Inner Life of Plants. As you would have seen some of the content online on LMS, that in this particular module, what we really want to do is understand what chemical herbicides are, how they work, how do we classify them into different categories, and then we also look into how weeds which they intend to kill can evolve against certain herbicides, what we call herbicide resistance. So one would think what herbicides have to do with the plant physiology. So there is a strong connection when we look at the plant's physiological processes, whether it's photosynthesis or respiration or source to sink relationships. Everything is connected in terms of the way herbicides, chemicals, they work. So basically, these are disruptive chemicals that acts in different parts of the plant's physiology to disrupt certain physiological processes, and that way they can disrupt the growth, development, and eventually lead to the plant mortality. So I thought instead of just going through a few slides, I'll give you a bit of an overview in a couple of snippets. So please watch this video and another one covering some of the main content, but do consider the slide deck accompanied with these videos to actually go through the overall content, and hopefully it'll be good enough for you guys to understand what we wanted to discuss. And I'm very much looking forward to our in-person discussion in few days time. So what we have today here is, um, when we talk about herbicides, it's no brainer that they are chemicals that are aimed to control weeds or kill weed plants, and we'll go into a bit more detail about what weeds are later. But in this short video, I want to show you how different types of chemicals act differently and what sort of classifications we have when it comes to herbicides. So we have a few different chemicals to show you, but before we do that, in the slide deck you will see a slide containing that's kind of a lot of information on that particular slide. It says basically site of action and then examples of specific herbicide chemicals for each site of action, and there is explanation on what site of action means when it comes to herbicides. And then a key point to consider would be for you to understand what is the difference between so-called mode of action and site of action. So as you could see, it's a fairly long list, and that gives you an idea how broad this field is and how many different chemicals we have available. In fact, these different modes or sites of action, each one of those are unique way to kill the plants in terms of disrupting their physiology. So you could look at the whole list. So there are certain that actually inhibits plant growth by inhibiting photosynthesis, when some other chemicals act on plants kind of making certain proteins that are essential for growth. So it'll be good to sort of go through that list. You don't have to cram and sort of memorize the whole list, but it'll be a good one, interesting one to sort of look at different modes of action, sites of action. So when we talk about classification, we classify herbicides in a few different ways. So they can be classified based on the timing of application. They can be applied before weeds could actually emerge from the soil profile. So those chemicals are specifically called pre-emergent herbicides, whereas the ones that are applied once weeds are actively growing, that are called post-emergent herbicides. Similarly, they can be classified based on the way they act within the plant system. So some would be acting by basically through contact. So when we apply on the foliage, they get in touch with the leaf or plant tissue, and they act straight away. Those specific herbicides are called contact-based herbicides or contact herbicides, compared to others that has to be absorbed by the plant, mainly through foliage, leaf, or shoots, and then they often gets translocated through xylem and phloem to the roots, and that way they sort of circulate throughout the plant system, and then they act. So they're often slower in action but more effective when it comes to the efficacy or the actual ability to kill the plants. Similarly, we could also classify herbicides based on their I guess the ability to stay in environment. So some are called residual herbicides that stay longer in the soil profile and acts, and they require more moisture, whereas others are more kind of especially the contact herbicides that do not persist long in the soil. And then there are some other ways to classify herbicides. So I thought I'll just give you a bit of a brief idea. So I'm just going to show you a few examples here for some of the chemicals that are most kind of commonly used, or a few examples of the ones that are heavily used in agricultural industries, and be it grain production systems, horticulture, and sometimes even in natural environments. So if we look at this particular chemical here, so we have each and every single pesticide or herbicide for that matter. They come in all different shapes and forms and different containers, but what's essential is the certain information, what we call label. And label is the law when it comes to interpreting what the chemical is and how do we apply, where do we apply, when do we apply. All those details are always included with any pesticide or herbicide. So if you look at this particular one, it says Roundup Extra Max. So Roundup is a common name, what we call trade name, of a specific herbicide, which is glyphosate. So glyphosate is the what we call active ingredient in this particular chemical, whereas Roundup is the trade name. And one active ingredient may have several trade names based on which company is producing. So for example, this particular product here, that's produced by Bayer Crop Science, and its name is Roundup. But as if you look at with the details, so it's a active constituent, it's 570 grams per liter glyphosate. So glyphosate is actually the actual active ingredient. What we also have here is, and every herbicide label would have this information, is the group number. So if you remember that sheet I showed you before, so group numbers are actually indication of which site of action that particular chemical belongs to. So we use numbering system. So when we talk about glyphosate, it belongs to group 9, which is in plant physiology perspective, it is an inhibitor of a specific enzyme called EPSPS. So that enzyme is really crucial in plant growth, and what this chemical does is it disrupts the activity of that particular enzyme, and that's what we call group 9 herbicide, right? So if we look at what other details we can tell about any chemical. So before we do that, so this is a label. So just first page of a label. So every herbicide would come with a similar sort of label. It has information on what active constituents is in there, which class it belongs to, and then there are whole heaps of instructions, or what we call directions of use, that where we can use, and then in certain situations which weeds it is effective to control, at what rate in certain scenarios, and so on. So the basic idea of the label is that it should have all the necessary details for any applicator and it also includes the list of other chemicals that can be compatible in terms of mixing with this chemical. In addition, it also, most labels would also provide you basic guidelines about what should be the protective measures you should take when you apply these chemicals. So in a summary, glyphosate or Roundup, it's a non-selective herbicide. That means it's another way to classify. So it can kill pretty much any plant it's sprayed on. So it's not selective in action, whereas some other chemicals, they are selective for certain weeds. Some kill grasses, others kill broadleaf species. It's post-emergence and it's a systemic herbicide. So it needs to move through the plant system to be able to work properly. So in contrast, we have another example here. It's called spray seed, which is, as you could tell, it's a trade name, but it's got details here. So it has active constituent called paraquat and diquat, and it belongs to group 22. In contrast to glyphosate or Roundup, this particular chemical is a contact herbicide, but it still is applied as post-emergence, and it's also a non-selective herbicide. If we look at another example where we have another chemical called drop zone, its active ingredient is 2,4-D. This is an interesting one. So it's an example of a chemical which belongs to so-called oxenic based herbicides. So they are basically like growth regulators, but when applied at high concentrations, they kill the plants. So this particular chemical belongs to group 4. It's a selective chemical, so it only acts on selective weeds. Not all weeds will be killed by it. It's also a post-emergence and systemic herbicide. Moving on, I mentioned about some examples of chemicals that are post-emergence versus pre. So the last three I showed you, they are post-emergence, whereas if we close up on this one, so this chemical is called Overwatch. So Overwatch is a specific example of a pre-emergent herbicide where we apply it on soil profile and it kills the seeds that haven't really emerged from soil profile. So they, at the stage when it's about to germinate, at that stage these particular chemicals kill the plants. So this specific herbicide, it has a spectrum for use in certain cereal crops and some legumes as well. But as you could see, it's got several different details. It belongs to group 13, which is a different site of action again. So the the active ingredient or constituent in this chemical is called bixlozone. So that's an example of something which is highly selective, and it's a pre-emergence herbicide. But as I mentioned before, some herbicides can persist in soil and act for a long time, so it's one of those residual herbicides as well. Moving on, we have another so-called pre-emergent herbicide. Sorry, it's just a small packing, but it's a chemical called Voraxor. So Voraxor is the trade name, and it has two different active constituents, sulfonylurea and trifluorodeoxyzine. So these are the actual active ingredients mixed in this formulation. It's also a pre-emergent herbicide. It belongs to a different site of action, group 14, and is applicable in certain cereal and legume crops. So as you could tell, these different chemicals, they belong to different groups. They act differently when they get into the plant system, but the end goal is obviously to kill the weed plants, to control them. One more thing before we finish up here is important to note that no matter what chemical you're using, they are highly dependent on external climatic factors as well. So chemicals are often dependent on environmental factors such as moisture availability, temperature, rainfall, humidity, and so on. So there are certain chemicals, especially the pre-emergents, where once applied on the soil profile, they often need a fair bit of time and moisture to get activated in the soil, and then they can work properly. On the same note, some post-emergent herbicides, they need a fair bit of time to actually work, but sometimes if the conditions are not conducive, if it's too hot or too cold, you might not see effective control. So I hope that gives you a kind of overview of how different chemicals work, what herbicides are, what sort of sites of action. So please feel free to go online, check some of the resources I've shared and also the slide deck to complement this video, and hopefully they'll give you a sort of comprehensive overview of how herbicides work. Thank you so much.